I've always been interested in flight simulation, but probably the biggest factor in getting me to take FSX seriously back in 2009 was the discovery of Orbix software. It just made such a difference to the sim, and once I discovered that, largely through YouTube, it has to be said, I was just hooked, and so I started buying up Orbix software. Of course, back then it was exclusively Australian software, and I pretty soon discovered AussieX as well. Those days the Orbix and AussieX communities were pretty much the same, or very much overlapping communities. And of course AussieX added 350 extra strips, but they weren't just any strips. They were, the backyard farm strip kind of fields that were just, to me, so enticing. And fast forward to 2021, and here we are with Flight Sim 2020, and it occurred to me that given the quality of the default scenery in FS 2020, might be a good idea to go looking for some of those AussieX strips to see how they look. So that's what we're doing today. Bit of an adventure in its own right. Let's see how we get on. And of course, to do that we can use the original documentation for the AussieX strips, which comes with a list of all the strips and instructions how to fly there, because many of these strips, don't forget, won't appear in the GPS. They're not official strips at all, really, many of them. Some of them are, but we ought to be able to find them. So let's see. So we couldn't take a look at AussieX flagship strips without looking at this one. This is Katoomba in New South Wales. Again, this is default scenery. This is just utterly, that would be you could put that in a box and sell it as an Orbix product, and nobody would be any the wiser. The foliage around here is just, again, it's super dense. The contouring, the subtleties of the light and shade make this feel, particularly when we get lower. I mean, that ridge just to the lower left of the nose now, you can get a sense as we're moving over it that there is real relief there and contouring. And just look at how that airport sits within the terrain. This is a very, well, not very high airport, but it's about 3,000 feet above sea level, and cut out of the middle of the forestry. So you can see quite a hazardous airport to approach, really, in terms of if you're going to have an engine failure, you don't have many outs. This was really one of my favourite strips in AussieX. It was really nicely done. Not much on the ground, but some old, farmyards, kind of industrial electrical equipment, things like that. We've got a little bit of that, a couple of buildings. Slightly disappointing when you get down to ground level, so we're not going to do that, but absolutely spectacular strip in a spectacular setting. Look at those water features over there. That's probably a reservoir with a dam, looks like, just off below the nose now. I mean, these are the best kind of strips in my view, the ones that are really idiosyncratic, unpaved, distressed backyards strips. But again, just looking at where this is situated in the landscape, that town modelling, it's absolutely fantastically done. So we're in the vicinity of Sandfly, Tasmania, and this is really going back to the earliest days of Orbix and AussieX, at least in my experience. Tasmania, you may or may not know, was the demo region for the earliest Orbix product, the demo region for Australia, and so it was free, the entire island of Tasmania. And of course, once you added in the Orbix free airports, and more to the point, the AussieX airports, it was an absolutely great package. And so we're flying towards Sandfly here. Sandfly is an airport or an airstrip I've featured in a number of videos in the past, my earlier videos, notably the Piper J3 Cub from A2A Simulations. And first impressions here are the difference in how that scenery played out in FSX and how Sandfly plays out in FS 2020 is just, they're just almost incomparable. Sandfly is just coming up on the left of the nose. We're going to fly around, so just coming up there on the left of the nose. I'm going to fly out to the other end and make an approach from there, and it's a nice time of day. We get a good lighting conditions here, just looks beautiful. I don't know, I haven't researched what the proper approaches to this airstrip would be. in real life. From this end it's pretty. Now again, in FSX with the Orbix scenery and the AussieX strip, it's just a very easy approach from either end. I don't know if the terrain mesh is more detailed. I suspect it is. The the Orbix terrain mesh was somewhat lacking if I recall, and there was the Holger mesh free add-on, which was a slightly higher resolution mesh, but I do feel that the landscape here is much more detailed, and you compare that with the visual impression of presence from FS 2020 with the lighting in this aerial perspective. Really, it's just phenomenal. Another thing is here, if you were watching when I was flying that approach, there was a point at which the airfield disappeared as we got lower and the trees have essentially eclipsed the airfield. You can just see it starting to reappear as a sort of line feature in the trees to the front 3/4 position. The tree coverage in FS 2020 is just amazing. I mean, I don't know how they can get this kind of performance with this kind of coverage. The performance is a bit glitchy, you're going to notice here. I haven't got the highest spec of PC. I was amazed that I get this performance with my regular FSX PC. Again, look at that terrain. Clearly from the airstrip to the right it falls off down into a gully. There's the river down there is really well done. The strip itself, I have to say, it's a default FS 2020 strip. It's not done to great standards. It's barely more than the photo terrain and a couple of buildings stuck on there. So disappointing at ground level. So this is another trip that I wanted to make between a pair of airports that I'm reasonably familiar with and have appeared in quite a few of my videos. This is Maitland and Elderslie. So I'm taking off from Maitland, but flying out to Elderslie, which is a very small kind of backcountry strip with a distressed kind of, I suppose, asphalt runway. It was just a really nice, characterful airport. And again, comparing what we're flying over with the Orbix Australia land class scenery, we immediately notice just an immense difference. Now that Orbix Australia scenery is pretty good actually, particularly in the vicinity of these couple of airports. But again, looking at that alongside what we get in FS 2020, the comparison is slight. Just looking what we can see, these are real farms and so on. There's features on the ground. I don't know what that strange collection of dots is there, but it's got to be something. The water masking is beautiful by and large. That river we're flying over. I mean, the sandbars down there, on another day we could go down and probably land on those sandbars. Be nice to see how they look. Just flying the Cessna 172 here because it's to hand. I've got it wired up more or less with what I need to operate the autopilot and the GPS. Deliberately flying low here just so we can get a look at how compelling this scenery is from this height. We're at 1200 feet above sea level. I don't know what we are AGL. It's probably about 1200 feet AGL. So we're coming up on Elderslie now. I've got it programmed on the GPS, so you can see it does exist in the database, which is something that can't be said for all of these airstrips we've been trying to find. And Elderslie is just above the compass now. It's not that foregrounded kind of. There's something that looks like a grass strip just off the left of the glare shield there. That's not the strip we're looking for. The strip is above that, and it's a grey asphalt strip. Now this strip is pretty good, even in default. It's a good facsimile of the AussieX strip. From this height, doesn't have the same amount of detail. There are some buildings on the ground. I think there's a couple of aircraft as well. The AussieX one is actually nicer. The bitmap, when you get down, it shows the distressed sort of crazed surface much better. It also has the airfield identifier. It actually says Elderslie lettered onto the runway in really large letters. We don't have that in this default strip. There's an interesting effect just turning onto final here. I've got a feeling those buildings are probably, if not photogrammetry, they're photogrammetry derived, because you can see they seem to be kind of actually sunken into or maybe it's just an elevation issue that their buildings are sunken into the terrain. But that's only on very close scrutiny. It's not particularly compelling. The modelling here is clearly very rudimentary of the airfield, so it all kind of breaks down at a little bit at this height. But it's here. and we can land here, and there's some sense of occupation in terms of vehicles and aircraft. So that's Elderslie. So here we are in Queensland, still in Australia for all of these strips, and we're flying out of Caloundra towards the west or the northwest, and we'll get to that presently. But just look at this again. This is default scenery, a little bit glitchy as I've noted a couple of times before. That's down to my PC not being optimised in any sense for FS 2020. Not paid much attention to that at all. It's my old P3D setup, but this terrain is just fantastic. So we're heading for, this is really very much the true spirit of this experiment, which is to find some of the smaller Aussie X strips, some of which are not really strips at all in the present day. And the one we're looking for today is called Maleney North. I've featured this in a number of my videos, notably the BN2 Islander video, which we set up a landing and analysed the strip in a fair amount of detail. So we're going looking for that strip. Now, it's not an airport we're going to find in the database ever really. It's clearly like a farm strip, nothing approaching a paved or even a strip. You know, it's a field with an uphill, loads of obstructions, and I guess just enough room to get an aircraft in. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't get an Islander in there in real life. So we're going in search of that. We're in, you might have noticed we're not in the Cessna 172, we're in a much smaller, this is one of the ultralight aircraft in FS 2020, just because we're going to need that. So if you're going to look for this strip yourself, you need to fly northwest from Caloundra to a large reservoir or lake. It's Lake Baroon. It's important that you get the right lake, because there is actually another lake or reservoir very close to Caloundra. So I did spend a futile hour or so faffing about around that lake, wondering why I couldn't find this strip. So you want to find the right lake, and we need to be on the southern shore of that lake to have any hope of finding the strip. So that down there is what we're looking for. So the thing about this strip that sets it apart from the other ones we've looked at, according to Google Maps or Bing Maps, in the present day, this appears no longer to be an airstrip, and it's barely recognisable from the Aussie X rendition. But having matched feature for feature and scrutinised the aerial mapping, pretty sure this is the site, and it's damn tricky. You know, it's really hard to see how this could be used in real life for anything but the smallest of aircraft. So it's interesting just to try that out. Now what we're looking for is a couple of characteristic things. There's a couple of small lakes here which we need to be using as landmarks. We'll go around a few times. That red house just below and to the right is significant as well. I say house, it's a building. We pretty much overshot the strip. In fact, there's the strip right there below us now, which you can't really get a good sight of it. So I'm going to go around again. There's one of those little lakes. That's going to be our last, just off to the left there, that's going to be our last kind of heads up. In fact, that's too close really to be a useful landmark. Well, it's you know, if you haven't identified the strip by the time you get to that lake, you're really too close to shoot a landing. That off to the left, slightly further out, just coming back into view about now, that's the other lake. So you can kind of connect up those two lakes. Then we've got the red house straight ahead, and basically the strip is immediately to the left of that. It's out of the left hand window now. So we've dumped all the flaps. The reason we're flying this aircraft is we can get much slower. We'd struggle to get the 172 in here, in truth. You know, the slightest bit of float on landing and you're out of space. A lot of trees here as well, which we didn't see in the Aussie X version. Again, those trees are very, very much volumetric in how they appear. And then we're going to touch down here. There's a little lake there to the left which is hidden by trees. and this was much more of a scrape on the ground that you could identify as a strip. But pretty sure this is it. Everything else matches. There's a road at the top, there's houses off to the right there. The contouring of the field is authentic. So there we are, Maleney North. Not much to see on the ground. And again, we've got that lovely kind of procedural grass, which just adds a little bit of spice to off-airport landings.